The night I got accepted into the University of Cape Eden was supposed to be the happiest night of my life. I ran home barefoot through the dusty road, holding my acceptance letter tightly against my chest. My heart was full of pride and excitement. I wanted my parents to see that their daughter had done something great. When I reached home, Mama Toba and Baba Lalu were sitting in the courtyard, counting the day's shop money. I could barely breathe from excitement as I waved the letter in front of them and said, "I made it. I got in." I expected them to hug me, to smile, to tell me they were proud. But my father just looked up slowly, his face serious. He said, "College? For what? You'll end up selling bread like the rest of us." I froze, thinking he was joking. I laughed a little and tried to hand him the letter, but before I could speak again, he grabbed it, tore it in half, and let the pieces fall to the ground. My heart broke right there. Then he said something that burned in my chest forever. "You're not smart, Jimo. You're just stubborn. You'll never use a degree." I stood there, unable to speak, my eyes full of tears. Mama looked away and said nothing. My brother Rito started laughing, saying, "See, I told you Papa doesn't waste money on useless dreams." I turned and ran to my small room, locking the door before they could see me cry. I sat on the floor, holding the torn pieces of my letter, shaking. I couldn't understand why my parents couldn't see what I saw. I had worked so hard, studied under candlelight, prayed every night. All I wanted was a chance to make them proud. As I cried, I realized something. I could either let their words destroy me, or I could use them to push myself forward. I looked at the torn letter again and whispered to myself, "If they don't believe in me, I'll believe in myself." That night, I made a promise. I would find a way to study, no matter how hard it became. I would show them that their daughter's dreams were not foolish. They might have crushed my letter, but they could never crush my will. That night, the pain turned into fire inside me, and I knew my journey had just begun. 2 days after my father tore my acceptance letter, I packed a small backpack with 2 shirts, a notebook, and a few coins. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just left before sunrise, walking to the main road, and boarding an old bus heading to the city. My heart was heavy, but my mind was clear. I promised myself that I would never beg anyone to believe in me again. When I arrived in the city, I had nowhere to sleep, no family to call, and no one to trust. I walked around until I saw a small bakery. The sweet smell of bread reminded me of home. I asked the baker if he needed help, and he looked at me from head to toe. He finally said, "You can sweep the floors and wash the trays. I can't pay much, but you'll eat." That was enough for me. That night, I slept on a small mat in the bakery storeroom, surrounded by the smell of fresh loaves. It wasn't comfortable, but it was safe. Every morning, I woke before everyone else, cleaned the ovens, and arranged the bread for customers. I worked from dawn till late evening. But when the bakery lights went off and everyone went home, I took out the borrowed textbooks I had collected from a kind librarian and studied by the dim light in the storeroom. Sometimes, my eyes burned from exhaustion, but I didn't stop. I remembered my father's words. "You'll never use a degree." Those words became my fuel. I told myself I'd prove him wrong, no matter how long it took. The baker's wife noticed me one night as I was reading. She leaned on the door and asked softly, "Why are you working so hard for something your family doesn't even support?" I looked up at her and smiled. "Because one day, they'll want what I built from it." She nodded slowly, maybe understanding more than she said. Days turned into weeks, and I became part of the bakery family. The baker trusted me with money and deliveries. Customers liked me because I was always polite and hardworking. Every little coin I saved went into a tin box under my mat. It wasn't much, but it was hope. I didn't know where life would take me, but deep inside, I believed that this small job, this tiny bakery, was the beginning of something big. I didn't have a degree yet, but I had determination. And that was the first step toward the life I dreamed of. One hot afternoon, I was working at a small cafe near the market. I had taken a second job there after my bakery shifts to save more money for school. My hands smelled of soap and coffee as I wiped the tables and cleared the cups. The cafe was usually busy, but that day, a man in a wrinkled brown suit walked in. He looked tired, like someone who had been carrying too many worries for too long. He ordered a simple meal, rice and stew, and ate quietly in the corner. When it was time to pay, I noticed him searching his pockets again and again, his face growing pale. The waiter beside me whispered that the man didn't have money to pay. The manager started getting angry, threatening to call security. I could see the embarrassment in the man's eyes. He stood up slowly, trying to explain. Please, I lost my wallet in the taxi. I just needed to eat something. Everyone was staring at him, some people laughing under their breath. I couldn't bear it. Without thinking twice, I reached into my apron pocket and took out the small money I had saved from tips, just enough to cover his bill. I walked to the counter and said softly, I'll pay for him. The man turned toward me in surprise. Why would you do that for a stranger? He asked quietly, his eyes wide. I smiled and said, because I know how it feels to have no one help you. For a moment he didn't speak. Then he smiled, but it wasn't just any smile. It was one filled with gratitude and something I couldn't name. You remind me of myself 20 years ago, he said. What's your name? Into power. And gave her mother not just a home, but a legacy. Savings, the man everyone laughed at, was not just anyone. He was the head of the foundation I had prayed to hear from. I could barely breathe as I thanked him over and over. When the call ended, I sank to the floor, clutching my chest, crying tears of joy. That night I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, whispering to myself, it's real. It's really happening. By morning, I packed my small bag again, the same one I had left home with. Have time to waste. Every exam felt like a battle, and I treated each one as if it was the last chance to prove I belonged there. By my third year, I started thinking about how life was back home. I remembered how my father's bakery struggled whenever farmers delayed flour delivery or prices changed suddenly. I thought, what if there was a simple way to connect farmers directly with buyers? That small thought became the seed of an idea. I spent my nights learning how to build an app using free online tutorials. It wasn't perfect, but I kept improving it. I named it FarmLink, a tool to help farmers sell their goods directly to markets and businesses without middlemen. When I presented FarmLink at the university's tech fair, my hands were shaking. The judges listened quietly, their faces unreadable. I thought I had failed, but then one of them stood up and started clapping. Within seconds, the entire hall followed. I couldn't believe it. Reporters came to ask me questions. Students hugged me. That was the first day I realized my pain had a purpose. A few months later, I started receiving emails from investors and agricultural companies across Africa who wanted to partner with me. My little idea was no longer just a school project. It was a dream taking shape. And in that moment I knew the years of hunger, struggle, and sleepless nights had finally begun to mean something. 3 years after graduation, my life had completely changed. What started as a simple idea on an old laptop had grown into something far bigger than I ever imagined. My app FarmLink was now a full company with offices in 3 countries, Nigeria, Kenya, and Ghana. Hundreds of farmers used it every day to sell their produce directly to big stores and hotels without middlemen taking all their profits. Seeing how much it helped them made every struggle I faced in the past feel worth it. I had a team of young developers who believed in my dream, and together, we worked day and night to make it better. Then came the day I received an email saying I had been selected to receive the Global Impact Award. I couldn't believe it. Me, the girl who once slept in a bakery storeroom, the girl whose father said she would never use a degree, was now being recognized on an international stage. When I walked across that stage to accept the award, the hall was filled with applause and camera flashes. I felt my knees weaken, not from fear, but from the weight of everything I had been through. Reporters wanted interviews. Magazines called me the girl who turned rejection into revolution. I was invited to speak at events and mentor young women who dreamed of building something meaningful. My life had become everything I used to wish for. But deep down, there was still a quiet space inside me. The space where my family used to be. I hadn't heard from them in 6 years. Not a single call, not a single message. They never asked if I was alive, if I was hungry, or if I made it. But one evening, as I was reviewing a business proposal, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered. A soft voice came through the line. Jumo. It said, shaky and uncertain. My heart stopped. It was Mama. We're proud of you, she said quickly, almost too perfectly. Your father wants to talk. I sat there in silence, my hand trembling slightly. I wanted to feel happy, but something in her tone didn't sound real. It wasn't the warm voice of a mother who missed her child. It was careful, rehearsed, like she was reading a script. Still, I swallowed my thoughts and listened as she said, "Your father is so proud. He always knew you'd make it." Those words hurt more than comforted me. Because deep down, I knew this call wasn't about love. It was the beginning of something else entirely. A week after that phone call, something happened I never imagined. My assistant knocked on my office door and said, "Ma'am, there are 3 people here asking to see you. They said they're your." Foolish. They might have crushed my letter, but they could never crush my will. That night, the pain turned into fire inside me, and I knew my journey had just begun. 2 days after my father tore my acceptance letter, I packed a small backpack with 2 shirts, a notebook, and a few coins. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just left before sunrise, walking to the main road and boarding an old bus heading to the city. My heart was heavy, but my mind was clear. I promised myself that I would never beg anyone to believe in me again. When I arrived in the city, I had nowhere to sleep, no family to call, and no one to trust. I walked around until I saw a small bakery. The sweet smell of bread reminded me of home. I asked the baker if he needed help, and he looked at me from head to toe. He finally said, "You can sweep the floors and wash the trays. I can't pay much, but you'll eat." That was enough for me. That night, I slept on a small mat in the bakery storeroom, surrounded by the smell of fresh loaves. It wasn't comfortable, but it was safe. Every morning, I woke before everyone else, cleaned the ovens, and arranged the bread for customers. I worked from dawn till late evening. But when the bakery lights went off and everyone went home, I took out the borrowed textbooks I had collected from a kind librarian and studied by the dim light in the storeroom. Sometimes, my eyes burned from exhaustion, but I didn't stop. I remembered my father's words. "You'll never use a degree." Those words became my fuel. I told myself I'd prove him wrong, no matter how long it took. The baker's wife noticed me one night as I was reading. She leaned on the door and asked softly, "Why are you working so hard for something your family doesn't even support?" I looked up at her and smiled. "Because one day, they'll want what I built from it." She nodded slowly, maybe understanding more than she said. Days turned into weeks, and I became part of the bakery family. The baker trusted. Family. My heart skipped. I told her to let them in. When the door opened, there they were, my parents and my brother Rido, standing proudly as if they owned the place. They were dressed like royalty, wearing expensive fabrics and gold jewelry. My father walked in first, smiling widely, his laughter echoing through the room. "My daughter," he said loudly, pulling me into a hug I wasn't ready for. "You made it big. The whole village talks about you." I stood stiffly, trying to process everything. My mother kept saying how beautiful my office was, running her fingers over the furniture like she was inspecting it. Rido sat on the couch, taking pictures of the room with his phone. For a moment, I wanted to believe they had finally come just to see me, to say they were proud. But deep down, something didn't feel right. My father's laughter was too forced, his compliments too sweet. After a few minutes of awkward conversation, my father's face changed. He reached into his bag and brought out a file. "Actually," he began, clearing his throat, "we came to talk business." He slid the paper across my desk. "This is a proposal," he said. "We need a small loan, about $5 million, to expand the family bakery. It'll be a huge project, Jumo. It will honor our family name." I looked down at the document, then back at their faces. My hands went cold. The same people who once told me education was a waste, who tore my admission letter and said I'd never use a degree, were now sitting in front of me asking for millions. My mother smiled nervously, as if waiting for me to say yes. Rido avoided my eyes, scrolling through his phone like he didn't care. I felt a heavy ache in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I leaned back slowly and said, "You mean my name, Father?" The room went silent. My father frowned, pretending not to understand. "We're family, Jimo. What's yours is ours," he said firmly. But I could see the truth in his eyes. This wasn't love or pride. It was greed wrapped in fake smiles. And in that moment, I knew this visit wasn't about family at all. It was about money. My money that I told them to come back the next day because I needed time to think. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling an ache that went deeper than anger. I had imagined this moment so many times. The day my parents would be proud of me. The day they would finally see my worth. But now that it was here, it felt hollow. They didn't come for love. They came for money. I realized that all the years I had worked, all the nights I had cried, all the sacrifices I had made, none of it mattered to them beyond what it could buy. The next morning, I walked into the office early and printed a document. It wasn't a check or a transfer form. It was a proposal, something that could help them, but only if they truly wanted to earn it. When they arrived, dressed elegantly as if they were attending a royal meeting, I greeted them with a calm smile and handed my father the folder. He looked confused as he flipped through the pages. "This is a partnership proposal," I said. "FarmLink is expanding. If you want to grow your bakery, I'll bring you in as suppliers. You'll have to meet the standards, of course, quality, consistency, and accountability. You'll earn every cent through work, not through favors." My mother's eyes widened. "Jumo, are you saying you won't help your own family?" she asked softly, trying to sound hurt. I took a slow breath. "I am helping," I said. "But I won't give handouts. I built this company from nothing. Every person who works with me earns their place. You taught me to survive, not depend." My father's expression changed from confusion to fury. He slammed the folder on the desk. "You dare talk to your parents like this? After all we did for you?" I looked at him steadily. "Yes, father. Idare. Because you're the ones who taught me that the world doesn't owe me anything. I'm just living by your lesson." For a moment, silence filled the room. My mother tried to smile, pretending to soften things, but I could see the disappointment behind her eyes. Not because of my words, but because I refused to give them what they wanted. As they stood up to leave, I felt both pain and relief. Pain because they still didn't understand me. Relief because for the first time, I had set a boundary. I wasn't the same helpless girl they once ignored. I was someone who had learned to choose self-respect over guilt. They left my office furious, throwing words like knives. My father shouted that I had forgotten where I came from, that success had made me proud and heartless. My mother followed, shaking her head in disappointment. I watched them leave, my chest heavy but my eyes dry. For the first time, I didn't chase after their approval. I had spent too many years begging for love that only came with conditions. This time, I chose silence, the kind that protects peace instead of breaking it. Months passed, and I buried myself in work. FarmLink grew faster than I ever imagined. We partnered with farmers from remote villages, giving them fair prices and direct access to urban markets. Every deal felt like a small victory, not just for me but for the people who once had no voice. I still thought about my parents sometimes, wondering if they were okay, but I couldn't go back to being the daughter who lived only to please others. A year later, during a business review meeting, one of my managers mentioned that a bakery from my village had become one of our top suppliers. My heart skipped a beat. He showed me the name, my family's bakery. They had joined the co-op without knowing FarmLink was behind it. Their bread was now being sold through the very system they once mocked me for creating. I didn't remove them or make a fuss. I just smiled quietly. Life had come full circle. Weeks later, I received a call. The number was familiar. My father's voice was softer than I'd ever heard it before. "Jumo," he began, his tone trembling. "So all along you were helping us?" "Yes," I said gently. "But not as your child, as your business partner." For a moment, there was only silence on the line. Then I heard him sniff quietly, trying to hold back tears. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I thought success meant forgetting us. But you didn't. You just became wiser than all of us." I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened, and my heart ached, but it wasn't the pain of rejection anymore. It was peace. He finally understood what he had thrown away. Not just a daughter, but the bond we could have shared if love had been unconditional. That silence between us said more than words ever could. It was the sound of truth, heavy, healing, and real. Years later, I returned to my village for a special event celebrating innovation in agriculture. I hadn't been back in a long time, and walking through the familiar streets felt surreal. The same dusty road where my father once tore my acceptance letter now looked smaller, but somehow the memories felt larger than life. Children ran up to wave at me, their laughter bright and curious, and elders nodded with warm smiles, as if they had been waiting to see me succeed. I felt a mixture of nostalgia and pride that made my chest swell. When it was time for me to speak on stage, I looked out over the crowd. My heart beat fast, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from knowing I had arrived. I spoke slowly, letting every word carry the weight of my journey. They told me I'd never use a degree, I said, my voice echoing over the gathered villagers, but I used it to build bridges they couldn't see. I paused and let the words sink in. The crowd clapped, not just for the words, but for everything I had done to reach that moment. As I glanced around, I saw my parents standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. Their faces were serious, but I could see the truth in their eyes. Finally, they understood. There was no need for words between us. No apologie, no explanation, no argument. They had seen what I had built, the lives I had touched, and the respect I had earned. They knew at last that success isn't something you ask for. It is something you create, silently, patiently, and with determination. I walked off the stage later, children following behind me, asking questions about the technology and the app one had developed. Elders came up to shake my hand and offer blessings. I realized then that the pride I felt wasn't just mine. It belonged to every struggle, every sleepless night, every tear I had shed along the way. I had earned it myself, without needing anyone to validate me. And as I left the village that evening, I glanced back at the street where it all began. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the familiar path. My parents were still there, standing quietly watching. We didn't speak, but I didn't need to. Success doesn't beg for recognition. It doesn't wait for approval. It simply shines, until even those who doubted it have no choice but to look up. And that night, I knew I had finally built something no one could ever take away. Pride in myself.